I think to answer this question about challenges women have to face when they're pregnant, we have to wonder first, what are the basic needs of pregnant women? And I realize through experience that apparently pregnant women need to communicate with other pregnant women. They need to talk with other pregnant women, with young mothers and babies. I realized that when in a hospital in France, we had introduced the concept of singing session for pregnant women, when women were invited to come and sing together on Tuesday night, meeting around the piano. You know? And what was interesting, that of course they were happy to sing. To sing is also a need when women are pregnant. Perhaps the need was forgotten, but it's not by chance that our singing sessions were very popular, this need to sing. But what's interesting, that after each sessions, women were happy to say, see you next week. We meet again next week. And after singing, when they were talking about themselves, their baby, fantasizing about baby in the womb, happy to meet young mothers in a maternity unit who already had their baby, were also singing, talking with the midwife and so on. I think it's a basic need. Meeting, fantasizing about baby in the womb. What is new also at a time when we understand from scientific perspective that our health is to a great extent shaped in the womb. That's what we are learning at the present time. It's something new. At a time when we understand that the baby in the womb is growing and developing very quickly, at a time when we understand that the emotional state of the mother is an important factor influencing the growth and development of the baby in the womb, we understand as well, from several perspectives, that ideally what a pregnant woman needs is to live in peace, to be in a positive emotional state, to have the experiences of emotional state like joyful experiences. I go back to our singing sessions. At the end of a session, we could see joyful faces. So we are at a time when we understand that the emotional state of pregnant women is vital. And that's a way to consider some kind of new challenges. That today, the emotional state of pregnant women is to a great extent influenced by the medicalization of pregnancy. Today, pregnant women have many prenatal visits, medicalized visits. They see doctors very, very often. And we have to realize that in our society, the emotional state of a pregnant woman is highly influenced by new factors special to our society, which is the effect of medical visits. We have to realize that prenatal care is a new concept. 100 years ago, there was no prenatal care. There was no, everything was different. There was no preparation to childbirth, no prenatal care. All new, and so there are new factors influencing the emotional state of pregnant women. And without giving details, we can observe that many women today, many pregnant women, have difficulties to live in peace because of the dominant style of prenatal care. The dominant style of prenatal care is testing the growth of the baby, the development of the baby, testing the health of the mother, try to detect possible health problems for the mother. Incredible number of tests, so many that today we are reaching a time when it's almost impossible to meet a normal pregnant woman. Difficult for a pregnant woman to live in peace. There are always some reason to worry because of this style of prenatal care. For example, we might say, after prenatal care, women understand that she's too old or too young, too fat or too thin, her blood pressure is too high, too low. They do a test, hemoglobin test. She's anemic, she needs iron tablets. They did a test called glucose tolerance test. She's told that she has gestational diabetes. They do ultrasound scan. Baby's too small, too big, too much liquid, not enough liquid. Placenta is not at the right place. They do a vaginal swab. Oh, one day they find a streptococcus B. You have to give birth with an antibiotic. You're Rh negative. You have to think of that. Another test, for example, you have a low platelet count, or in some countries, they do routine tests, depend on the country, like toxoplasmosis and so on. It's incredible the number of tests. So that at the end, finally, and when a woman is almost due, she's given a date for labor induction in case labor has not started. So woman is worrying, oh, I hope my labor will start on Wednesday, before Wednesday. Difficult to live in peace. Imagine that finally, at the end, labor starts at the right time. Woman goes to the maternity unit, they do an exam, medical exam, they find that the baby's back is on the right side. They would prefer baby's back on the left side. So just to say, today it's becoming impossible to meet a normal pregnant woman. Something we have to consider when we realize that ideally pregnant women will live in peace. It's true that when we talk about childbirth, often the word fear appears as well. The fear of birth is an aspect of human nature. Because human beings talk, they communicate different ways, they live in cultures, they know about what it is to give birth, they heard about that, they know about vital risk associated with childbirth. So the fear of birth is an aspect of human nature. That we have to start from that. But what we have to understand better, to rediscover, is the solution nature found to overcome this cultural conditioning dominated by the fear of birth, that cultural conditioning. Nature found a solution. It is that when a woman is giving birth, during the birth process, the part of the brain that we call the neocortex, the part of the brain that is so highly developed among humans, so developed that we can understand that the fear of giving birth and many other fears are special to our species. This part of the brain thanks to which we can be rational, do mathematics, talk, communicate with language, called this part of the brain called the neocortex, I repeat, is supposed to stop working. It's not its business. Giving birth is the business of archaic, primitive brain structures. That's what. And the main handicap during the birth process among humans is the activity of the brain of the intellect. The brain associated with conditioning, cultural fears, fears of death, fear of giving birth, and so on. So the solution nature found that during the birth process, this brain of the intellect, this neocortex, must stop working. That is not well understood today, which is, however, still understood by some women, even in 2004, 2014, 2015, so on, there are probably still some women who understand this solution that nature found to overcome the human handicaps during the birth process. It's simple, simple. Neocortex must stop working. And some women know that when giving birth, they were as if cutting themselves off from our world. Women giving birth can forget what's happening around. They can forget what they learned. They can forget their plan. They can behave in a way that usually would be unacceptable regarding a civilized woman. A woman in hard labor dares to scream, to swear. She can be suddenly impolite. I heard recently of a woman in hard labor that had been biting her midwife. That's a wonderful sign of a reduced neocortical control, losing the control. That's exactly what makes birth possible among humans. A laboring woman can find herself in the most bizarre postures, unexpected postures, often primitive, quadrupedal. She's on another planet. That's what makes birth possible among humans by eliminating the cultural conditioning and particularly all the fears that aspect of human nature, including the fear of giving birth. It's an aspect of human nature. The point is to rediscover, to understand better the solution that nature found to make that possible. It means that neocortex must not work. It means that the basic need of laboring woman is to be protected. When we speak like modern physiologists, the key word is protection of an involuntary process of birth. You cannot help an involuntary process, but you can protect it. Protection or anything that might stimulate the neocortex, the brain of the intellect. It means in practice, first, silence is a basic need. Language is the enemy when a woman's giving birth. That's something to rediscover. That's unknown in our society, particularly in the natural childbirth groups. That sometimes they guide the woman in labor. They tell her how to breathe, how to push, papa, they cannot stop talking. Language is the enemy when a woman is giving birth. And anything, any factor that might stimulate the brain of the intellect, the neocortex. Light, for example. Today we can explain how it works. Effect of light is that you cannot release the darkness hormone called melatonin, the hormone thanks to which you can fall asleep at night, because it's often light to fall asleep. And one of the properties of this melatonin, darkness hormone, is to reduce activity of the neocortex. Women, laboring women, need to be protected against situation, all attention enhancing situation. For example, feeling observed. If you feel observed, you observe yourself. You pay attention. That's another basic need, not to feel observed, that to be rediscovered at a cultural level, particularly in the natural childbirth groups. Look at all these videos of so-called natural childbirth. You see a woman giving birth with 3-4 people around. This basic need needs to be rediscovered at a cultural level. Among the enhancing attention situation, we can also include the perception of a possible danger. You have to pay attention. It means to feel secure. It's vital when a woman is giving birth. So when you understand this solution that nature found to overcome the effect of our cultural conditioning, and particularly the fears, all the fears of death, fear of giving birth in general, so on, we, at the same time, using the language of physiologists, we can explain a new way what are the basic needs of laboring women? To be protected against any factor that might stimulate the brain of the intellect, the neocortex. The key word is protection. It's important to emphasize at which point environmental factors are important when a woman is giving birth. To give birth, you need to release the hormone, or you need to release a mixture of hormones, but one of them is important. You can give the name, it's called oxytocin. Many people now have heard about oxytocin. So explain to give birth, you need this hormone. You need, in particular, this hormone called oxytocin. But this hormone is special. This hormone is special because it is a shy hormone. Oxytocin is like a shy person who does not appear among strangers or observers. That's the hormone you need to give birth. By the way, you also need to release this hormone in other situations. For example, to make love, both partners have to release oxytocin to make love. It's well known that in general, you need privacy to make love. In all societies, we heard of by anthropologists, all societies, it has been noticed that even societies where, in general, in the daily life, they don't have privacy, however, always find a way to couples isolating themselves to make love, to release the shy hormone. To give birth, you also need to release, and particularly to give birth, this shy hormone. It's incredibly simple, but it's a way to realize the importance of the environment. It's a way to realize that if there is as few people as possible around, and perhaps just one person, I take this opportunity to say that I know about one situation, one scenario that is commonly associated with the birth as easy and fast as possible. It's when there is nobody around the laboring woman apart from one experience, midwife or doula, sitting in a corner and knitting, and that's all. It's simple, simple. So that's a way to illustrate what can be explained to all pregnant women in advance, the concept of shy hormone. You don't need to know more than that. You don't need structures, preparation, and so on to understand this point, which is not understood at the present time in our society. It has to be rediscovered because there has been now thousands of years of socialization of childbirth, that we have to realize that for thousands of years, childbirth has been socialized. Well, we have sufficient amount of information to say that in pre-literate, pre-agricultural societies, in other words, in society before the Neolithic Revolution, we have enough information to say that in these societies, women used to isolate themselves to give birth, to go to a special hut, to go to the bush, to go close to the river or things like that. So if this was better understood, I think it might change dramatically the history of childbirth. To be a way to enter a new paradigm. We need today urgently a paradigm shift. We have to try to get rid of our dominant cultural conditioning, the helping, supporting, coaching paradigm, and entering the protective paradigm, protecting an involuntary process. Not easy to challenge thousands of years of conditioning. young generation must realize that the issue of the participation of baby's father at birth is special to our society. In 1953-1954, that to say 60 years ago, I spent 6 months in a maternity unit of a Paris hospital as an externe, that means medical student with some clinical responsibilities. At the time, nobody had ever imagined that baby's father might be in a delivery room. Nobody had thought of that. At that time, it was the same. In the case of a home birth was still common. In the case of a home birth, baby's father was given a task. For example, spending hours and hours boiling water, or he was going to the bistro. We had to realize what happened suddenly in an unexpected way around 1970. It happened that occasionally, when a woman was arriving in the maternity unit in labor, she was telling the midwife, "Can I keep my husband with me?" Midwife had not anticipated such a demand. I had phone calls from midwife on duty at 2 o'clock at night. What should I do? A woman is arriving in labor. She has a strange idea. She wants to keep her husband with her. What should I do? She had never thought of that. So we can interpret this occasional demand. It was obviously an adaptation to absolutely new situations. It's the time when the births were more and more concentrated in huge hospitals. We might say in the time, the beginning of the industrialization of childbirth. So, historically speaking, we cannot dissociate the participation of baby's father at birth and the industrialization of childbirth. It's an adaptation to this new situation. It's also the time when the family became smaller. The nuclear family showed up in the daily life of many modern women. Baby's father was the only familiar person. It's also the time when the role of the midwife became different. Traditionally, the midwife was a very independent person, autonomous person. Suddenly, she became one member of a medical team. So this is what we have to realize, that it's possible to interpret this occasional demand. What was difficult to anticipate, to predict, is how this occasional demand, within some years, very quickly, will be transformed into a doctrine, a dogma. Baby's father must participate in birth. That was based on theories. Interestingly, these theories were not expressed by people directly involved in childbirth. It didn't come from the midwife, never thought of that. It came from outside. So what we learned at that time were explained by theoreticians that if baby's father can routinely participate in the birth, that will create strong links inside the couples, so that we could anticipate that the rate of divorces, of separation, will decrease. We also explained baby's father is a familiar person in the life of a modern woman. The presence of a familiar person will make the birth easier. So we could anticipate that from now on, the need for obstetrical intervention will decrease. An example of question that has been raised probably at that time is when baby's father is participating in the birth, what kind of influence this fact can have afterwards on the sexual life of the couple? It's a difficult question. It's a question of sexual attraction. Sexual attraction is mysterious. Sexual attraction perhaps needs some kind of mystery. Is there not a risk of not hiding anything? At that time, the only person I can remember who have been raising this question were women from the previous generation. Women who had babies in 1920, 1930, at home, of course. When they were told about the behavior of young couples, the couple giving birth, the reaction was, I cannot imagine my husband watching me when I was giving birth. They were at least raising the question. We are talking about the need to raise questions. At the present time, I have a special interest for a kind of issue that has not been considered by the theoretician in the 1970s in the health and the behavior of baby's father, the days and the week following birth. I never thought of this issue when I was a hospital practitioner. I thought of that with my experience of home birth. Because being polite, I was asking, how is your husband? I was amazed by the great number of answers that had some similarities, which was often, we are not lucky. Now I need my husband, but he's not well. He's sick, he has something. So I heard such a diversity of possible health effect on the baby's father, generalized eczema, kidney stone, stomach ache, need operational appendicitis, abscess, coccyx, things like that, mysterious knee pain, and so on and so on. So that's how I started to make inquiries. I spoke about that with doulas coming to our information session, and we accumulated the anecdotes at such a point that I'm convinced now there is something like a male postpartum depression, which is not recognized as such, because male depression is a hidden, a covered depression. Men have a symptom. They have appendicitis just at that time, or heart attack just at that time. And sometimes strange behavior as well, need to escape from daily reality. A man who, the day after the birth, irresistible need to play golf, disappeared all day long. Another one to play computer games. So this is just to realize that many questions have not been raised properly. So about the effect on the birth itself, we assume that if the theoreticians of the 1970s had a better understanding of birth physiology, if they had anticipated that when a man loves his wife, it's normal that he's releasing his a little bit anxious, releasing stress hormones. It's normal, it's understandable, and we know that if a man is releasing adrenaline, this is contagious, transmitted to the woman in labor, and when you release adrenaline, you cannot release oxytocin, the main hormone in childbirth. So if the theoreticians of that at that time had anticipated the possible effect on the husband, they would have been much more cautious. In general, we might say that the difficulty of childbirth is proportional to the number of people around. And finally, ideally, there is one situation which is usually compatible with a birth as easy and fast as possible, usually compatible, is when there is nobody around the labor woman apart from one experienced and silent midwife. When we understand that one of the basic needs of laboring women is not to feel observed, there is more risk at feeling observed if there are several people around. We have to rediscover that. We need scientific explanation to find what was known in many cultures. I know about a proverb from Persian proverb. They were saying, when there are two midwives, baby's head is crooked. Hungarian proverb saying, when there are two midwives, baby is lost. Other part of the world, in ethnic groups in Amazon, they were saying exactly the same. And I heard in Chile, traditionally they say in Chilean Spanish, muchas manos matam la guagua. It means too many hands kill the baby. So this has been well known in many societies that it's dangerous to have two midwives. And we can explain that in a scientific way. And we said, experienced midwife. Laboring woman will feel more secure, lower level of adrenaline. She can feel that the midwife has a good experience. Silent midwife, dangers of language, the enemy stimulating the neocortex. So this is an example of very, very simple situation, easy to explain in 50 minutes, easily interpreted in the light of modern physiology, but unknown situation, almost unknown in our society, and culturally almost unacceptable. When I talk about that with health professionals, they only consider the obstacles, why this situation is utopian. And the question is, for example, and what about baby's father? And what if the midwife is a man? Or promoting knitting, it's sexist. So we are in a strange situation, a paradoxical situation, when we're in a situation where it's politically correct to say that we have to reduce our rate of cesarean section. People repeat that, we have to reduce our rate of C-section. That's politically correct. But if you describe a situation which is compatible with an easy fast birth, as easy as fast as possible, of course, you have to flirt with utopia. You are at the limit of what is politically correct, because you are challenging thousands of years of cultural conditioning. And that's the situation in which we are now. And talking baby's father is an opportunity to realize the current difficulties, to get out of the situation in which we are, that is to say, the bottom of the abyss. So the question about the possible long-term effect of how we are born, it should not be a question of opinion. Today it's a question of hard data. And what we can learn today for sure, that the way we are born has long-term consequences. And when we say long-term consequences today, it's not just lifelong effect. Today, we are starting to consider transgenerational effect of what happens at the beginning of our life. More and more studies suggesting that the effect can go beyond lifelong effect. And this can be interpreted in the light of emerging scientific disciplines like epigenetics, and also this modern bacteriology. We can understand now how what is called the microbiome, they say the hundreds of trillions of microbes that occupy the body of the mother can to a certain extent transmitted to the following generation. What's interesting also is that it's for some pathological conditions, all studies give concordant results. They say the same, whatever the country and whatever the research protocol. An example, if you take the case of autism, important topic today, because increased number of autism, you'll find that whatever the country, whatever the research protocol, there are similarities in the result. It's that the period of birth is critical, the time when the baby is born. In modern language, we can say it appears that the period of birth is critical for gene-environment interaction. You know, diseases like that, there are genetic factors and there are environmental factors. The question, practical question is when this interaction occurred. And in our database, we have enough information to say that it seems that period of birth is critical. Difficult to give more details, but because information in terms of timing, when. For example, there was a Swedish study involving all the Swedish population born in 20 years. Enormous. Australian study looking at hundreds of children who are autistic and comparing with their siblings, another protocol, another part of the world. A Japanese study, risk of autism according to the hospital where babies were born, another protocol, another part of the world. But Israeli study and so on, a dozen. All these studies have something in common without looking at the details in terms of timing. Today, in terms of bacteriology, there is a real revolution with new techniques used by bacteriologists, DNA sequencing and so on. We can present Homo sapiens in an absolutely different way. It was impossible to do that 5 years ago. Today we can say that Homo sapiens is a kind of ecosystem with a constant interaction between the hundreds of trillions of microbes that occupy the body, the gut, the skin, the mouth, and so on, which is called the microbiome, and our genes, our genome. And what we are understanding, what is new, is at which point our health, our behavior are influenced by our microbiome. For example, it's acceptable today to say that our gut flora is 80% of our immune system. So, but the point, and that's an important point, is that we realize that our microbiome, our gut flora, our skin microbiome are to a great extent established immediately after birth. To be born is to enter the world of microbes. When baby is born, baby jump free at the very time of the birth. An hour later, millions of microbes have already colonized the body. And originally, these microbes were always microbes coming from the mother, transmitted by the mother. Vaginoperineal route is full of microbes, colonizing immediately the baby, often in a familiar place, a place familiar for the mother, bacteriologically speaking. So, and the first microbes have an important role to play, long-lasting effect on that. It's as if immediately after birth they educate our immune system, they program our immune system. Important to understand that today, because we have to realize that the microbes that come from the mother, which are supposed to be the first one occupying the territory, are friendly microbes for the baby, familiar microbes, because the maternal antibodies have easily crossed the human placenta. So that's a way to go back to some studies you can find in our database, that suddenly some result of epidemiological studies can be interpreted in the light of modern bacteriology. Because today, suddenly, from a bacteriological perspective, childbirth is a phase of human life that has been dramatically modified. Until recently, all babies were born by the vaginal route in a familiar place. Today, some babies are born by cesarean section, but that to say, in an operating theater, sterile environment, by the abdominal route, a terrible microbial deprivation. Babies need microbes immediately after birth. Terrible. And many babies are exposed to antibiotics. Another way to disturb the way the microbiome is established. So important to understand that, because suddenly some studies were providing mysterious results. It can be looked at again in the light of modern bacteriology. We can understand now that disturbing the birth process from a bacteriological perspective is disturbing the way our immune system is programmed immediately after birth, is not just established but much more educated. So theoretically, we can anticipate, and this is confirmed by epidemiological studies, more dysregulation of the immune system. And interesting that in our database, it appears that caesarean birth is a risk factor for allergic diseases, asthma, dysregulation of the immune system, risk factor for autoimmune disease. To say the immune system takes a wrong target. For example, diabetes type 1, being born by caesarean section is a risk factor. How to explain that? Now we can. And many other health problems today are explained that way. So today, when we talk about the possible long-term consequences of how we are born, we are not in the field of intuitive knowledge, of opinion, of ideas. We are in the field of hard data provided by epidemiologists that study correlations, and new possible ways to interpret this hard data, particularly today in the light of the microbiome revolution. Today, whatever the discipline you consider in the field of biology, you have to consider the effect of the microbiome revolution. Today, using the new ways to understand Homo sapiens offered by modern bacteriologists, suddenly it's becoming easy to explain the importance of the way babies are born. Particularly easy to explain among groups that have a good scientific background. Today, suddenly, it's incredibly easy to talk, in particular, to doctors about the importance of how babies are born, particularly in the light of modern bacteriology. Many ways to explain the importance of how babies are born, but it depends to which public you contact. If you want to preach to the converted, the best way to be accepted is to talk about love. That works well. But if you want to talk those who until now have not realized the importance of the way we are born, bacteriological perspective is the best.